Could we get a motion for the approval of the minutes of the of the March 26, 2012 meeting? It's been moved in second. Are there any correction or additions to the minutes? If not, all in favor? Any opposed? We have speakers this evening. We have David Reynolds and Debbie Sabin, I believe it is. Okay.
I'm sorry, I really don't want to speak. I was just
Just signing
signing in.
in. Mr. Reynolds, did you want to speak?
May I speak when the B&B question comes up?
Okay, if you want to wait till then, okay. All right, not a problem. Okay, our first item for consideration this evening is P1, Resolution 35-R-12, reserving $7,076,170 of the city's bond volume cap allocation for the year 2012 for single-family housing and the industrial commercial revenue bond program. Staff recommends adoption of Resolution 35-R-12, which reserves the city's right to issue $7,076,170 in tax-exempt bonds under the bond volume cap allocation. This resolution must be adopted by May 1, 2012. By filing the resolution, the city prevents the state of Illinois from using Evanston's bond volume cap throughout Illinois for eligible purposes.
Move approval.
Is there any discussion?
Alderman.
Alderman Rainey.
Could a member of our staff explain the nature of this and make it pretty clear that no bonds are being sold at this time, we're not spending any money? And particularly, how can it be used and who can we share this with?
Certainly, Alderman Rainey. Thank you. Dennis Marino, Manager of Planning and Zoning. The bond volume cap resolution in front of you is something that you've seen in past years at this time of the year. Bond volume cap relates to tax-exempt bonds that many decades ago used to be called industrial revenue bonds. But in 1976, there was a Tax Reform Act in Washington that allowed for bond volume caps to be used in a more restricted way, still for industrial development, economic development purposes, but also for certain kinds of housing. They've been used to lower interest rates on mortgages. They've also been used basically to lower the cost of financing for expansion of businesses, commercial businesses, industrial firms, et cetera. There are many things they cannot be used for in the area of public facilities. Bottom line is this resolution, adoption of this resolution, doesn't authorize the issuance of any bonds. It just protects the state from this time of the year being able to remove these from local jurisdiction and use them throughout the state. These bonds, when issued, are revenue bonds, which means the project that benefits from the proceeds of these bonds has to pay it back. And there's no credit enhancement by the city at all, and indeed there's no obligation by the city. The difference, hence, between a revenue bond and a general obligation bond, where the city does have a financial responsibility. But in this case, no financial responsibility. You're not authorizing any issuance tonight. You're just reserving it for future use.
Go ahead,
Dennis, given that we hear from business people that loans are so impossible to get these days, regardless of how stable the plan or business or project is, does it surprise you that we're not getting more inquiries from legitimate uses of this money to get some of it? To have the advantage of the loan?
It's a good question. Certainly the interest rate would be lower, but interest rates are already fairly low, so that's not really been much of an advantage. The negative aspect of this is that the cost of issuance and underwriting is fairly expensive for a bond, and so in order to make it worthwhile, it needs to be an issuance over $2 million or somewhere in that range.
That's what I was talking about,
right.
A big loan.
Yeah. The other issue to consider is that this goes through the same credit test that a regular bank loan would as well, because there's no government guarantee, there's no government risk reduction on the part of the whoever buys the bond, their risk exposure.
But who determines the credit worthiness of the applicant? Because many people are telling us, look, I'm great credit risk. I want to build a building, but I can't because I can't get a bank to loan me any money. And the banks are to some degree not very reasonable, even a person with good credit.
At the end of the day, the bond underwriter would have the greatest influence in terms of the rating, but the actual end buyer of the bond, which is often a commercial bank, also obviously has a lot to say in terms of their willingness to do so. So it isn't a panacea for certainly the lack of credit issues that have existed because of very tight underwriting standards. It can help in some cases. I think the last one that we, as City of Evanston, participated in was with Ozinga Concrete, which has a facility here in Evanston. But that was a very large, throughout the metropolitan area kind of project dealing with multiple sites and equipment.
It just seems like, what's the point if nobody can get it? I mean,
Right. There are some entities that would be able to get it if they do pass that kind of underwriting test, certainly, and as the economy improves, more people are likely to be able to do that. So some of these bonds are being issued in Illinois, so they are being approved, but it's certainly more difficult than it was 7 to 10 years ago.
thanks.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Not, it's been moved and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Moving on to P2, ordinance 42-0-12, granting a special use for a commercial indoor recreational facility at 2125 Ashland Avenue. Zoning Board of Appeals and the city staff recommends the adoption of ordinance 42-0-12, granting a special use permit for the operations of a commercial indoor recreational facility at 2125 Ashland Avenue. The applicant has complied with all of the zoning requirements and meets all of the standards of a special use for the district. CrossFit E-Town will only offer personal strength and conditioning in individual or small group classes. Is there a
Move
motion?
approval.
It's been moved and second. Is there any discussion? I believe, yes.
I think this is just such a fabulous use of this property. This was not the property we used for storage, was it, for Public Works at any time?
I don't think so. No,
I do not believe so, no.
Okay. This is a great use. Are you all from there?
The applicants, I
Yeah, is
believe, are
any-
here.
Oh, right here, you're from there?
Yes, yeah.
Well,
Debbie Saban from CrossFit E-Town.
excellent, great, yeah. Thank you for bringing this, yeah.
Any other questions,
I mean, it's not
comments?
my ward, but.
Yeah, I know, it's
I
my
have-
ward.
I know, it's
I'm
just,
happy
you're
about it,
lucky,
yes.
you're so lucky.
Okay, it's been moved and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Great. All right, moving on to P3.
But, Madam Chairman,
Yes.
this was just introduction?
This was just for introduction, I'm sorry, yes. P3, ordinance 36-0-12, granting a major variation of special use permits for a planned development and drive-through facility located at 635 Chicago Avenue, Walgreens. Plan Commission and the city staff recommends the adoption of ordinance 36-0-12, granting planned development approval, a special use permit to the proposed drive-through, replacing the existing drive-through, and approval of a major variance to the proposed new Walgreens at 635 Chicago Avenue. Zoning Board of Appeals recommend approval of the special use for the drive-through and recommends denial of the major variance. Is there a motion?
Madam Chair.
Alderman Nguyen.
Yes, I move that we adopt the recommendation and then overrule the denial.
Oh, I don't think we have to, do we?
We don't have to do it now? All right, then I move
I mean, I just think that we need to,
discussion.
yeah, we need
Okay,
to just.
move approval.
Okay, it's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, now, comments. Mr. I'm sorry, Mr. Marino wanted to
Yes.
make a comment.
Thank you, Alderman Holmes. Just a quick summary, the ordinance in front of you that's proposed, that you've just recommended for introduction, or moved for introduction, I should say, is basically a plan development recommended by the Plan Commission. It also is a new drive-through facility to replace the existing one that's on site, that's been on site for many years. And that it also embedded within the plan development is the relief from the requirement in terms of the rear yard setback, where that would normally be 10 feet, it would be 0 in this case, but that does match the rest of the shopping center that will remain and also be enhanced as well. So staff has been working very closely with the applicant in this regard to work out a number of issues at the project, and we're quite excited about the prospect of a new Walgreens.
Alderman Rainey?
Well, in dealing with this, and I'm very much in favor of this, it's just a fabulous project. Can't we just move to introduce and approve of the Plan Commission's and staff's recommendation to accept the plan development and the major variation and the special use? I mean, do we have to even deal with the Zoning Board of Appeals?
You do not in this case because the ordinance incorporates all these things as positive actions by City Council. And given that we're doing all this at the City Council level, that's possible to do.
Alderman Nguyen?
Well, so just to make sure, Dennis, that I understand, if we approve the plan development, as Alderman Rainey is suggesting, does that include or do we have to make a separate amendment to deny the ZBA's recommendation?
Right. The ordinance as proposed, 36012, incorporates your approval of the setback from the rear lot line. And so that's one package. So you do not have to go through the action you would normally if you disagreed with an action of ZBA, where you'd have to separately call that out and act on it.
But all right, you don't mean approves the setback. You mean approves
Grant
zero-
relief. Yeah.
Okay, grants
Right,
relief
from the
set-
requirement.
Okay,
Correct.
That's my
Thank you.
understanding. Okay.
Yes.
I would also like to speak in favor of this. We were thrilled when when Craig Stevens came forward and told us that they wanted to renovate this shopping plaza and that we were going to have one of the new era Walgreens at this location. That also means that they're going to be adding to the streetscape on Chicago Avenue, which would, along with the Amley development just to the north of this, really is a whole nother 2 blocks of the streetscape on Chicago Avenue that's going to be redone, along with the CTA wall on the west side, which was something that truly I thought would never happen. This is really terrific. And so I think that given what we've learned from staff and from the developer, I don't think that this will be much of a hardship at all to the community. Actually, this is going to be a significant improvement. And the night that we had the public meeting about this was one of the few nights we had snow, but it was the night we got a lot of snow, and we still had 35 people come out to the Firehouse Grill. So all enthusiastic and wanting to know about this. So I think this is a terrific development.
Such a relief when people like things, isn't it?
Yes.
This is the kind of easy economic
I
development.
know,
Yes.
you love it, yeah.
Would you like to do more?
I have a couple of spots.
Yes.
Alderman Holmes, Rick Strusner, the owner of the shopping center and the developer of the Walgreens, is here if you would like him to say a few words.
We'd love to.
Yeah.
Yes, please, come on.
Talk to us.
Well, first I'll say thank you for all your kind words. It leaves me a little speechless. But anyway, I'm Rick Strusner. I'm the president of Craig Stevens Development. My brother Monty is there also. And the two of us have been in business together for 40 years. And 30 years ago, we developed that site that was a car dealership. And I think Perry Drugs is who we built it for originally, and then eventually it became a Walgreens. And we're talking about the site. It's just that to the south, our right, is Keeney Street, and then to the west, below is Chicago Avenue, and then to the north is Kedzie Avenue to the left there. I guess I do have a pointer on this. Okay, right. And this area here, when this aerial photo was taking place, it was still car dealerships. But now this is what's being demolished, and now is actually up to the first floor of new construction of the Amley apartment project. And what really brought us here this evening is that I don't know how many months ago it was, I'd have to think back, but several months ago, I was making my annual or semi-annual inspection of the property to check on how our property manager was doing. and I drove the area, and right from my car, I called my brother, and I said, "You're not going to believe what's happening to this part of town, and we're being left behind, and that we need to catch up to what's happening between the streetscape and the car dealerships being gone and the railroad wall being repaired." And I said, we need to talk to Walgreens, and said, what would they think about knocking their building down, demolishing the building, and building a new property? And we then arranged a meeting with them, and much to our surprise, they received it quite well, and they were very happy with the idea of starting over on that property. So then we started our process with the city and met with Dennis and his staff, and it brought us through the cycle. We had our community meeting, and we had our development board meeting, and so on. And that brings us here tonight. So basically our proposal, is to demolish the Walgreens and the video store, the associated paving, and build a new Walgreens store. And we're going to improve then the facade of the small shops that, as an architect, I see as the link between the Amley project and the new Walgreens building. And we're going to provide improved site circulation and parking, provide new pedestrian walk and landscaping, and make this very pedestrian friendly, with even bringing paving across the parking lot area that show pedestrians where to walk. And so to accomplish this, we needed two things to take place. One was we were granted 30 years ago the drive-through for the pharmacy. Actually, we did that for Walgreens, and so that was granted. And then when we started to study the site to fit the Walgreens' new footprint of what their building is, and actually their new building actually has a hard time fitting on the site, but they've accommodated it by turning it sideways and fitting it, but we had to build along the property line along the alley, and that became, we needed the request for a zero property line. And actually, when we first laid out the site, we didn't think that was going to be an issue, because 30 years ago when we developed, for some reason it was a zero property line, and we built the rest of the small shops that you saw are along the alley. So those are the two, the special use and the major variation requests. This is the property as it stands from a survey. And then on the right where it says existing to be removed, and then the existing small businesses to remain. And most of our small businesses there have been there the whole time that we've had this property, and they've thrived and they've done very well. And they're all very excited about this renovation. So that brings us to our new Walgreens development. with a new parking pattern, which really improves our site. Our entrance area becomes widened. The whole flow through the parking lot and lining this up, and then you don't now go behind the building to go to the drive-through, and you come in and you pick up your prescriptions. I know Walgreens has learned, and many others have learned, that these drive-through facilities are really important to people with families and children, that they can go out and get a prescription in the middle of the night and have their children with them and don't have to worry about leaving them at home and don't have to worry about leaving them in a car. And so it's really become a very important part of the pharmacy programs. This is a full site development that, at this end is Kedzie. This is the Amley project. Here's our new project. This will allow then the streetscape to be fully developed along the streets here. And then the railroad side, I saw today, was all dug up, and they're ready to start work on that. So it'll really improve this whole neighborhood, and it's exactly what I had in mind when I drove out here that one day and said, oops, there's a lot going on here, and we should be part of it. So this is the new Walgreens facades that they're, it's interesting, and my brother could get up here and probably talk for about a half hour about how for years, we've been developing Walgreens for probably 30 to 40 years now, and for years we would talk to them about more glass. They had, their original concepts were windowless, and we would always say, how about more glass, more glass, more glass? And here we are 30 years later, that the concept is a much more friendly facade and inviting facade to come into. And this is not our site, but this is the style of building that is being selected to go on that site. And then we will be improving this whole facade here to create a link between the two. And I think that just about answers or tells you why we're here today. And along with this, I'll add one more thing, that to be part of this whole program, we immediately hired Camburus and Theodore as architects, who does a majority of the Walgreens projects in the Chicago area. We then hired Gawalt Hamilton as our civil engineers, who are the ones actively involved with the city of Evanston with the Chicago Avenue improvements. And we hired Tesca Associates. All three of those firms have been in my life for a long time, but it was sort of fun to come back and find out that was still the team working in Evanston and helping pull all this together. I was on the phone today with Amley talking about hiring Tesca to analyze our common property line. And because we have a fence up on our property line, and I'm not so sure that fence makes sense anymore, and should that have something else be going on there? So we both agreed to work together and talk to Tesca and have them come up with thoughts of what that property line should look like. So, I love the team that we put together. I loved Walgreens' enthusiasm to want to be part of it. And I appreciate all the alderman has done for us with holding our hand, taking us through this procedure. And maybe I'll close with one last thing, just so everyone understands the schedule. Why it's important to keep this thing moving is that the only time Walgreens could agree to close a store is February 15th to Thanksgiving. So we all know time goes fast. So to be ready to knock down a building, to close the building, knock it down, and build for 5 months and be open for Thanksgiving, I need to have permits and drawings and bids, and we have a lot of work to do before the end of the year. So that's why we're here, and we thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us. Alderman Nguyen.
Yes, Mr. Struzner, you might want to also add that people will still be able to get their prescriptions
Oh,
at that
yes.
site, because I think that's a really critical element that's.
Yes, that was
that
asked even in our
continuity, yeah.
evening. That was about one of the most important questions asked
Right.
that evening, of what about our prescriptions. And so we are providing Walgreens, unfortunately, we were going to do it a different way, but unfortunately, the mailbox tenant we have there is going to be closing. And so we are going to take that space and convert that into a prescription location for Walgreens during their construction period. We won't rent that up now for a year and a half or a year until that gives us a place for them to provide the prescriptions. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Any other comments, any questions? It's been moved in second. And Alderman, you're clear on the variation? Okay. All right, it's been moved in second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right. P4, ordinance 38-0-12, amending various portions of the city code relating to bread and breakfast establishments. The Plan Commission recommends amending the zoning ordinance to modify the regulations concerning bread and breakfast establishments. The Commission and its zoning committee considered the recommended changes proposed in ordinance 38-0-12 during several meetings. Is there, this is for introduction, is there a motion? All right, is there any discussion? Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot Mr. Reynolds. We have speakers, I'm sorry. I meant to do that before we moved it.
Thank you. My name is David Reynolds. I live at 204 Davis Street. I have some prepared remarks that I would like to read concerning beds and breakfasts. The Plan Commission has made some solid suggestions to you that I endorse. They include provisions for minimum ownership, that the special use is attached to the owner and not to the land, and that the minimum requirement in terms of numbers for parking spaces. There are other areas, however, in which I believe work needs to be done to adequately protect neighbors of beds and breakfasts. One distinct possibility is that B&Bs will congregate in particular areas. I believe such congregation would be very difficult on surrounding neighbors, both in terms of amount of commercial activity and ultimately in terms of property values. If someone is looking for a home and has a choice between one next to a B&B or another not next to a B&B, things being equal, most people, I think, will pass on the house next to or between B&Bs. The Plan Commission felt that this could be resolved through the cumulative special use provision of the zoning ordinance. That provision basically says that in judging the application for a special use, the Zoning Board of Appeals will consider the effect of all special uses in the area before approving such a use. What makes this problematic is that that decision becomes subjective with no real criteria for judgment. A good residential zoning ordinance should not have much subjectivity, so everyone knows what can and what cannot be done in their neighborhood, and so groups of neighbors don't have to organize to protect the integrity of their neighborhood. The only way to assure that B&Bs don't congregate in a particular area is to write into the ordinance a minimum separation distance. A distance of 1,000 feet would allow for plenty of B&Bs in town, but prevent any particular area from having an accumulation. B&Bs are commercial ventures, and as such, will have commercial effect on neighborhoods. Limitations on special events hosted by B&Bs are another area of concern. The Plan Commission has recommended one per month. Staff is suggesting perhaps one per quarter. This is an area where commercialization can have a major effect on neighbors. I think it is one thing for a neighbor to have a large party or wedding in their backyard, and quite another for someone to rent that yard out for an event. In the former case, you generally, as a neighbor, have a connection with the host and share in some degree their joy of the occasion. In the latter, it is a yard full of people paying your neighbor, the B&B, for a venue. The people are having a great time, the B&B owner is making money, and you are paying part of the price in disruption and inconvenience. I don't believe that 4 per year is reasonable. I think it should be less than that. I would prefer to have no special events allowed. I believe all parking requirements should be met off-street, either on the B&B property or elsewhere within a reasonable distance. I don't know of any place in the zoning ordinance that would allow required parking to be accommodated on-street. Allowing it in this case may set an unwanted precedent. In thinking about B&Bs in the context of the zoning ordinance, please consider this. A B&B is in many respects a home occupation. Like other home occupations, it is regulated because it can have a deleterious effect on a residential area. Many communities, including Oak Park, in fact regulate their B&Bs under the home occupation section of their zoning ordinance. Because a home business can potentially impact a neighborhood, Evanston has chosen fairly strict requirements for them. Major home occupations, which is the most intense level of home occupation, require approval by the zoning administrator and are limited in the following ways. No clients are allowed between 9 p.m. and 7 a.m. The area of the home used cannot exceed 25%. A maximum of 2 non-resident employees may be there. There may be a maximum of only 6 clients at a time, and a maximum of 3 deliveries per week. These restrictions are in place to protect the residential character of the surrounding area. As you can see, a B&B would have difficulty complying with almost all of them. A B&B has the potential to disrupt any neighborhood in which it exists, while contributing little, if anything, to the economic health of the community. I hope you will build on the work done by the Plan Commission and produce an ordinance that will protect neighbors and neighborhoods from commercialization. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. Is there any? No other comments or discussion? Alderman Nguyen.
Yes, I would like to suggest that I do think the Plan Commission has done good work here, but I do agree with Mr. Reynolds, the speaker, about 2 issues. One, and this was discussed at the subcommittee, the B&B subcommittee, was one, accommodating the parking, requiring the parking to be accommodated on the site, and 2, actually we discussed a third one, and 2, the distance requirement, a separation requirement from between B&Bs. And I do think that, and the third one is special events, but I'll get to that in a minute. I think a critical item is the distance requirement between B&Bs. As you all know, I lived across the street from one, and it was generally not an issue for us. However, if there had been 2 or 3 on my block, I would have felt very differently about it. And I do think that it is a commercial entity. It's something that we're permitting R1 single-family residential owners to do if they fit into the requirements. But I certainly think that there are density issues. And in the interest of not just the homeowners and the immediate neighbors having to sort of rally and get out and come to the ZBA, I think it's also in the interest of someone who might live in a neighborhood and be thinking about the idea of whether they could or could not open a B&B, that we just have the rule be very clear, rather than having a fight at the zoning board. That's not productive. It's not community building. I think the best interest, and we hear this over and over again, is if the rules are clear from the very beginning, that it's much better for everyone involved. So I think having a very clear distance requirement would then not create the subjectivity arguments that tend to have everyone having their own opinion, rather than having a very clear distance requirement so that if you live next door to a B&B, that's fine, but it means that you aren't going to have one created on the other side of you. Or you're not going to have to go to the ZBA and try and explain why you don't want to have another one on your block. So I would recommend that we consider seriously a distance requirement. On my final point, while I've got the mic, I agree that we do need to limit the number of special events. We talked about this at the B&B subcommittee as well. Initially, one member said, well, I just don't think that's going to be that big a deal, except that when you think about it, maybe some site's going to be such a wonderful site for weddings, and, do you really want to hear a wedding going on next door? So I recommend that we say no special events. It's a B&B. I mean, it's a quiet occupation. I think Mr. Reynolds' analogy to home occupation is a really strong one. When people buy a home in a residential neighborhood, they expect there to be zoning protections for them, that they're not living next to a business. And I think that this is what we're doing right now, is providing some clear protections for someone who invests in a residential neighborhood, that it's not going to change. Or they're not going to have to come to the Civic Center and battle for it to stay the same.
Alderman Rainey and then Alderman Fest.
I don't have a problem with the distance requirement, because I certainly don't think there should be 3 or 4 in a block. But I don't know what you mean by 1,000 or 750 feet. Are you talking linear feet, or are you talking 1,000 feet? Because that would mean that if there were a B&B on Forest, maybe I don't even know what 1,000 feet looks like lengthwise, but I know height-wise. So does that mean one couldn't also be on Hinman? I mean,
Well, Alderman Rainey, I hadn't come up with a number, but one of the numbers that we talked about at the subcommittee was 900 feet. And the distance of separations is measured elsewhere in the zoning ordinance is from the perimeter of the property line. And that's how we measure it for residential
being the center of
care
the circle,
facilities.
right?
No. Pardon?
Being the center of the circle, the property the subject property.
Right, yeah. So that's how it's measured when we measure distances elsewhere in the zoning ordinance. The notice requirements that go out are from the perimeter in every direction. And for instance, residential care facilities, that distance requirement is from the property line in every direction. And I think that that's an appropriate way that we should continue to do it, because if you have one on Hinman and then you have one on Judson, there are people who live along that alley that it's the same thing as if it's on the front of the block. So I think we should continue to measure the distance exactly as it's done elsewhere in the ordinance.
Well, it's done that way for notice.
Well, no, it's done that way for residential care facilities as well.
Well, I'm absolutely rejecting the comparison between a residential care facility and this. However, do you know that our ordinance does not require an occupant, a homeowner occupant, to run a daycare center, 10 or 12, whatever home daycare is, that house does not have to be occupied during the day by a homeowner, that the property can be used only for daycare while the daycare is in operation and then closed up the rest of the time. I found that very surprising.
I find that surprising too, and if you wanted to change that, I'd be willing to look at that with you.
I think we need to take a look at that, yeah. I would support a distance requirement. I will not support absolutely no special events. I mean, how many people can you have at a special event at a 5-bedroom house? I mean, I don't know. But to deny even anything less than once a month, I think is just plain wrong, and I won't support it. So I would support once a month. I mean, nobody's going to tell me I can't have a party at my house once a month, that's for sure. So I don't see that would be any different, really, other than the people that come to my house are not paying to have the function. So there's a little difference there. I think that the parking issue should be dependent on the number of rooms being occupied in the bed and breakfast. If it's a 3-bedroom bed and breakfast, I think the rules should be completely different than a 5 or 6 bedroom bed and breakfast. I'm certainly not ready to vote on this. I would like to see some more information. It was raised by our guest speaker that, other communities do it this way. I don't know how they do it. I'd like to spend some time and take a look at that. I don't think it was in the packet, was it? I don't recall reading it in our packet. And I didn't go the extra mile to look it up. So I'd like to, I know it's only for introduction, but I think we should take a look at how other communities do it.
Madam Chair.
Sorry.
Alderman Fisk, and then Director Griffin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I thought Mr. Reynolds' remarks were really on point, and having sat through all the meetings, and as well as he did, I think he reflects the sentiment that both Alderman Nguyen had and I throughout the course of the meetings. I want to just talk a little bit about our experience with Bs and Bs in Evanston. They've been in the zoning ordinance for the past 19 years, and this is the first time we've ever had a legal B&B application. What that tells us, as you do the research on B&Bs, is that for the most part, these are not viable money makers for moms and pops. Renting out a couple of rooms in your house is going to be more of a headache and a hassle than the money that it would probably bring in. And that's really why we haven't seen Bs and Bs up to this point. It also says to me that what we are going to see in terms of Bs and Bs are going to be commercially run beds and breakfasts, much like the one that we approved recently at 300 Church Street. And with a commercially run bed and breakfast, that raises all of the issues that we've tried to address in the committee, including the one of special events. And again, as Mr. Reynolds pointed out, the special events are going to be not your neighbor's daughter getting married or son getting married in the house or backyard, but is going to be actually rented out for a commercial use to people who really are not known to the neighbors in an R1 residential zone. And this can have a big impact. Again, if your son or daughter gets married, that probably won't happen maybe every 20 years or so, unless you have a large family. Maybe it could happen more often. But to have a large event, especially if it's an outdoor event, in a house every month with catering trucks and everything else that's connected with that, is a real imposition on a residential neighborhood. I support no special events. So I guess I'd be interested in seeing what you come up with in terms of parking. We did talk about that at ZBA with the 300 Church, and that was one of the big sticking issues at ZBA. When ZBA turned down the application for 300 Church, that was one of their big concerns. So I'd be happy to take a look at that and see where we're going to go with that. We have a situation where there's a possibility that another B&B might be applied for in this particular block. I would like some reassurance from staff that this does put us in the pipeline in terms of responding to that application, if one does come in. But if that's the case, then I would be happy to listen to what staff has to say about parking. In terms of how this applies to other communities, Evanston has always been unique unto itself. We're not going to be defined by Bs and Bs. We have very, very strong residential neighborhoods that have characteristics and qualities that, again, make Evanston the very special place it is to live. But we shouldn't, I think, be putting stresses in place for people who really are using their houses as single-family residences and who come home after a week's worth of work and want to relax in their homes only to find a special event at a bed and breakfast going on next door.
Director Griffin?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just 3 points. Let me start, I guess, first with Alderman Rainey's comments. the, excuse me, the parking, the issue that we have with it's set up just like I think you're asking, one space per room. What issue we're having is it's still saying that you can count some of the on-street parking, and that's from curb to curb, or lot line to lot line, and we really don't think that's a good idea. It should be on-street. I'm sorry, off-street parking, and or like we did with the 300 Church, where we can make or the applicant can make some arrangements otherwise. We do have that chart that you're looking for, some other jurisdictions and how they're handling B&B. That was one of the first things we brought to the Planning Commission or Plan Commission for a work session. And then Alderman Fisk, your point about an applicant, this is a pending zoning ordinance change. We'll advise any applicant that if they were to come in, that there are ordinance changes, but it does not guarantee protection against this new ordinance.
Alderman Rainey. Okay. I think the distance thing is a good thing. I certainly would agree with that. I'm not sold on the no special events, because I would not like to think that you couldn't have something there. I would think that the staff's recommendation of 4 times a year is much more reasonable than once a month. I don't like the once a month thing. I think that is too much. But I certainly would support that as a part of it. And I've been trying to visualize this 900 to 1,000 square feet in terms of going each way. And I was trying to use 300 Church as a visual and finding out where that was. Mr. Reynolds? About a block and a half. That's okay. I thought that. I was okay. Okay. Alderman Wilson, you wanted to?
One comment or cautionary comment, I suppose. With regard to the distance restriction, I would want to make sure that it's worded in such a way that it precludes within a certain distance, as opposed to you can do it after a certain distance.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. I don't want to create a right to have one within a certain distance.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Alderman Nguyen?
Yes, just as we've been talking about this number of special events, it's occurred to me that with when people apply for filming permits at their home, for instance, for commercials or things like that, we only permit 3 of those a year. And I think that that's a similar type of comparison to make. I mean, because and that happened because we had a lot of people who decided that they would turn their homes into photo sites. And I think the 3 a year would be a better compromise. Yeah.
Alderman Rainey?
What is a special event? Could we flesh out what a special event is? It's my granddaughter's birthday party, with 4 little kids. No, 8, because she's 8. We get to have 8 kids when they're 8.
Well, I think that's a good question. I think that needs maybe a little bit of talking about and defining. A kid's birthday party, maybe not, but if you have pony rides and
okay.
I've been to some kids' birthday parties where there are 200 people there.
Well, let's look at this. I'm asking.
It wasn't
about
a pleasant
8 people.
experience, but
What is a special event? If
Okay.
we're going to restrict a special event, we have to define what is
okay,
a special
no
event.
pony rides. All right.
I think that's a point well taken, that we
Oh.
maybe do need to define that, so that, because I just think that just because you don't live in the neighborhood, if I'm a neighbor and I want to invite people who would never come to my neighborhood, I would want them to feel welcome there. So I have some issues with that, but in terms of, Evanston is unique, but I think should be open and friendly to accepting other folk in our neighborhoods. Is that you, Alderman Nguyen? Alderman Fisk.
Yeah, I think the concern about special events really is an outgrowth of the what happened at the Historical Society, and as they were using and renting out their grounds for various events, and the disruption that caused in the neighborhood. So we now have some control over that.
It became so popular.
Yeah, it became very popular.
God forbid. I mean, people can't go to the beach, people can't do that. I mean, it's getting a little rigid. So anyway, all right, I think let's look at what a special event is.
I think so. And maybe we could have that at the next, because this is just for introduction, so we have that as a follow-up. And you got Alderman Wilson's comment in terms of what can be versus what can't be. Okay.
I'm still not clear on what the parking is. Are we going to deal with the parking issue again?
Yes.
So are we holding this in committee, or how are we handling this?
It might be a good idea.
Yeah, let's hold it. Let's hold it. Okay. Okay. No items for discussion, no communication, and could we have a motion for adjournment?
Move to adjourn.
It's been moved in second, and I believe City Council will begin within the next, Mayor, 5 minutes, or you want 10? Next 10 minutes?
Excellent.
That's great. Next 10 minutes.